The desolate howl of the prairie wind carried whispers of ghosts through the abandoned mining town of Silverridge, Colorado. Shadows stretched like gnarled fingers across weathered planks as Sarah Reynolds pushed open the creaking door of what had once been the town's only saloon. It was 1879, and life on the frontier had taught her that mercy came rarely and usually with a price. She hadn't expected to find anyone in this forsaken place, certainly not the broad-shouldered figure slumped against the wall, his face obscured by the brim of a dust-caked hat. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the small derringer concealed in the pocket of her skirt. 3 years alone had taught her caution. The light from her lantern cast a golden glow over empty bottles and overturned chairs, the remnants of Silveridge's final days before the silver had run dry and taken the town's heartbeat with it. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Just shelter for the night." The man didn't move, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her from beneath that shadowed brim. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, like stones dragged across dry earth. "You won't find much shelter here. Roof's got more holes than Swiss cheese." Sarah raised the lantern higher, illuminating the stranger's face. Blood had dried at his temple, and a week's worth of beard couldn't hide the strong jawline or the scar that ran along it. His clothes, once fine, were torn and dirty. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, piercing blue, yet hollow, as if something essential had been carved out of him. "You're hurt," she said, moving closer despite her better judgment. "I've been worse." "That's not saying much." Sarah set down her saddlebag and approached him. "Let me see." The man flinched when she reached for him, his hand shooting out to grasp her wrist. His grip was strong but not cruel. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits adrift in a merciless land. "I don't know you," he said. "I don't know you either," Sarah replied, "but that head wound needs tending and I've got supplies." He released her wrist slowly, then leaned back against the wall. "Do what you want, though I'm not sure it matters." Sarah dampened a cloth from her canteen and gently pressed it to his temple. He winced but didn't pull away. In the lantern light, she noticed the emptiness in his eyes again, the look of a man who'd lost his bearings in the world. "What's your name?" she asked. The question hung in the air for a long moment. The man's brow furrowed as if he were trying to recall something just beyond reach. "I don't know who I am now," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hands stilled. She'd seen that look before in the eyes of soldiers returning from war, in the faces of men who'd watched everything they loved turn to dust. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his cheek, turning his face toward the light. "Start with alive," she said firmly. "That's enough for tonight." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps gratitude, crossed his face. He nodded once, a small gesture that seemed to cost him considerable effort. "Alive," he repeated. "I suppose that's something." Sarah continued cleaning his wound, her movements methodical and practiced. "I'm Sarah Reynolds. I'm heading west to California." "California's a long way from here," he remarked. "Everywhere worth going is a long way from somewhere," she replied. "What should I call you if you can't remember your name?" He seemed to consider this, his gaze drifting to the battered leather holster at his side. The silver engraving caught the light, the letter G gleamed dully. "Garrett," he said suddenly. "That's familiar." "Garrett," Sarah repeated. "All right then, can you remember what happened to your head?" His expression darkened. "Men, 3 of them, they wanted something I have." His hand moved to an inner pocket of his vest, checking that whatever was there remained secure, or they thought I had. "And do you have what they want?" Garrett's laugh was harsh. "Apparently. Though I couldn't tell you what it is." Sarah finished bandaging his temple and sat back on her heels. "You're suffering from memory loss. It might come back with time, or it might not. You sound like you know something about it." "I was a nurse during the war," she explained. "I've seen head injuries before." Garrett studied her with new interest. "The war's been over for 14 years. And yet some of us are still fighting battles," she replied. "Can you stand? We should move away from these windows. Those men might come back." With her help, Garrett rose to his feet, swaying slightly. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and lean. Despite his injuries, he moved with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to physical challenges. Sarah led him to a back room that had once been storage for the saloon. The door was solid and there was only one small window high up on the wall. "This will do," she said, setting her lantern on an overturned barrel. "I'll get my bedroll from my horse." "You're staying?" Garrett asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Unless you'd prefer I leave you bleeding and confused in an abandoned town." His lips curved slightly. "When you put it that way." Sarah retrieved her belongings from her horse, a sturdy paint mare she'd named Penny. After securing the animal in what remained of the saloon's stables, she returned to find Garrett examining a folded piece of paper he'd taken from his pocket. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "A map, I think, but I don't." His frustration was palpable. "I can't remember what it's for." Sarah glanced at the paper. It did indeed appear to be a map with markings that indicated terrain and a location marked with an X. But there were no names, no indications of what place was depicted. "Maybe it will make more sense in the morning," she suggested, unrolling her bedding. "You should rest," Garrett nodded, carefully folding the map and returning it to his pocket. "Why are you helping me, Sarah Reynolds?" She paused, considering her answer. The truth was, she hardly knew herself. 3 years of solitary travel had taught her to be wary, to look after herself first. Yet something about the lost look in his eyes had resonated with her. "Because there was a time when someone helped me," she said finally, "when I needed it most." Garrett accepted this answer with a nod, though she could tell he had more questions. She offered him some jerky and hardtack from her provisions, which he accepted gratefully. "You mentioned California," he said after they had eaten in companionable silence. "What's waiting for you there?" "A fresh start," Sarah replied. "My sister has a place near Sacramento. She's been writing to me for years, telling me to join her." "And you're just now deciding to go?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Some ties take longer to cut than others." Understanding flickered in Garrett's eyes. "A husband, he died 3 years ago." The words still felt strange on her tongue, though time had dulled their sting. "Mining accident in Central City. I'm sorry." "As am I." Sarah looked away. "What about you? Any family you can recall?" Garrett's brow furrowed with concentration. "Flashes. A farm, I think, a woman with dark hair." He shook his head. "Nothing solid. Give it time," Sarah advised. "Sleep might help." Though she could tell he was reluctant, exhaustion eventually claimed Garrett. Sarah remained awake, listening to the wind moan through the abandoned town, her derringer close at hand. There was something about the wounded stranger that intrigued her. Perhaps it was the contradictions he embodied. His hands were calloused from hard work, yet his speech was educated. He carried a gun with the ease of someone familiar with its weight, yet there was a gentleness to him that belied violence. Dawn broke with the pale, watery light of early spring. Sarah had dozed fitfully, waking at every creak and groan of the old building. She found Garrett already awake, standing at the small window, gazing out at the ghost town. "How's your head?" she asked. "Better," he replied, turning to face her. In the morning light, she could see the strong lines of his face more clearly. Despite the beard and the grime, there was a handsomeness there that caught her off guard. "Thank you for your help. You remember anything more?" He hesitated. "Fragments. I was looking for something or someone." His fingers brushed the map in his pocket. "This is important, I know that much." Sarah nodded, gathering her belongings. "Well, I need to move on. I've got a long journey ahead." "Where's the next town?" Garrett asked. "Red Rock, about a day's ride west of here." She shouldered her pack. "You're welcome to ride with me if you'd like, safer that way." Surprise flickered across his face. "You'd trust a man who can't even remember his own name." "I trust what I can see," Sarah replied simply. "And I see a man who didn't try to rob or harm me when he had the chance." A ghost of a smile touched Garrett's lips. "That's a low bar for trustworthiness." "Out here, sometimes that's all we have." Sarah headed for the door. Coming, the morning air was crisp and clean, the sky an endless expanse of blue overhead. Silverage looked even more desolate in daylight, a skeleton of a once thriving community. Garrett found his horse, a magnificent black gelding, still tethered where he had left it behind the saloon. "At least you remembered to secure your horse." Sarah observed as they prepared to depart. Some things are instinct, I suppose, he replied, checking the animal's legs with practiced hands. They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, riding side by side along what had once been the main road out of town. Sarah couldn't help noticing how Garrett sat tall in the saddle despite his injury, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. A man accustomed to danger, then. "You ride like a cavalryman," she remarked, something darkened in Garrett's expression. "I think, perhaps I was during the war," he touched the scar on his jaw absently, "though I couldn't tell you which side. Does it matter now?" He considered this. "I suppose not anymore." They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of hoofbeats on hard, packed earth the only sound. The landscape gradually shifted from scrubland to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Around midday, they stopped by a stream to rest the horses and eat. "May I see the map again?" Sarah asked as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. Garrett hesitated, then withdrew the folded paper from his pocket. Sarah studied it carefully, noting the contours of mountains and the winding path of what appeared to be a river. "I think this might be part of the San Juan Mountains," she said finally. "My husband worked claims in that region before we moved to Central City. See this formation here?" She pointed to a distinctive outline. "Locals call it the Devil's Backbone." Garrett leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "So this X could be a mine," Sarah finished, "or a claim someone staked, a valuable one if those men were willing to kill for it." Sarah folded the map and handed it back to him. "Is that what you think happened?" "They left you for dead to steal your claim. It's as good a theory as any," he replied, tucking the map away. "But it doesn't explain why I can't remember who I am." "The blow to your head was severe. Memory loss isn't uncommon." Garrett's gaze met hers. "You've been kind to a stranger, Sarah Reynolds. I won't forget that, whatever else I may have lost." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For 3 years, she had kept the world at arm's length, finding safety in solitude. Yet here she was, sharing a meal with a man whose past was a mystery even to himself. Perhaps it was the very emptiness of his identity that made him seem safe, a blank slate, unconnected to the pain she'd left behind. They reached Red Rock as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Unlike Silverridge, Red Rock was very much alive, a bustling settlement that had grown around a trading post established decades earlier. Horses and wagons crowded the main street, and the sounds of piano music drifted from the saloon. "We should find somewhere to stay," Sarah said, "and get you some proper medical attention." "I'm fine," Garrett insisted. "The bleeding stopped. That head wound needs stitches, and you know it." He didn't argue further as they made their way to the town's only hotel, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The proprietor, a portly man with suspicious eyes, regarded them with undisguised curiosity. "Rooms are $1 a night," he said, "in advance." Sarah counted out $2 silver. "We'll need 2 rooms, please." The man glanced between them. "Only got 1 left, I'm afraid. 2 beds, though." Sarah hesitated. Propriety dictated she refuse, but practicality won out. "That will do." As the proprietor handed over a key, Garrett leaned close to her ear. "I can find somewhere else to stay. And have you collapse from that head wound with no one to help," Sarah replied quietly. "Don't be foolish." The room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds separated by a nightstand. A wash basin stood in one corner, and faded curtains framed a window overlooking the street below. "I'll see about finding a doctor," Sarah said, setting down her bag. "You should rest." "Sarah," Garrett's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you." She nodded once, then slipped out into the hallway. Red Rock's doctor, she discovered, was away delivering a baby at her ranch some miles distant. The apothecary, however, provided supplies for proper wound treatment and advised that the local barber could stitch the gash if necessary. When Sarah returned to the hotel room, she found Garrett standing at the window, his posture tense. "What is it?" she asked. "Those men," he said without turning. "They're here." Sarah joined him at the window. In the street below, 3 riders had just dismounted in front of the saloon. Even from above, there was something menacing about them, the way they moved, the way other townsfolk gave them a wide berth. "Are you certain it's them?" Garrett nodded. "I recognize the horses, and that tallest one, he's the one who hit me." Sarah drew the curtains closed. "They don't know you're here. We should lie low until morning, then move on." "And go where?" Garrett asked, turning to face her. "I still don't know what they want from me or why that map is important." "The San Juans, then," Sarah decided. "If the map leads there, perhaps we'll find answers." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "This isn't your fight, Sarah." "I'm heading west anyway," she replied with a shrug. "And I admit I'm curious." The truth was more complicated. Something about Garrett had awakened a part of her she thought had died with her husband, a willingness to connect, to care about someone else's fate. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She cleaned his wound again, noting with approval that the swelling had decreased. His eyes remained fixed on her face as she worked, a question in them that neither acknowledged. "There," she said, securing a fresh bandage. "No stitches needed after all." "You have steady hands," Garrett observed. "Nursing teaches you that," Sarah replied, packing away her supplies. "That and how to stomach the worst of humanity." "Is that how you see the world, the worst of humanity?" Sarah paused, not always, but often enough to be careful. "Yet here you are, helping a stranger." "Perhaps I'm not as careful as I should be," she admitted with a small smile. They ate a simple dinner brought up from the hotel kitchen, then took turns using the wash basin to clean away the dust of travel. As night fell, the sounds from the street grew louder: laughter, arguments, the occasional burst of song from the saloon. "I should check on the horses," Garrett said, buckling on his gunbelt. "Is that wise?" "Those men won't recognize me in the dark," he finished. "I'll be careful." After he left, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly aware of how strange her situation was. 3 days ago, she had been traveling alone, as she had for 3 years. Now she was sharing a room with a man she barely knew, involved in a mystery she didn't understand. What would her sister think if she could see her now? The door opened, and Garrett slipped back inside, his expression grim. "They're asking questions about a man traveling alone," he said, removing his hat. "Offering money for information. Did anyone see you?" "No, I kept to the shadows." He sank onto his bed. "We should leave before dawn." Sarah nodded, though disappointment coursed through her. She had hoped for a proper night's rest in a real bed. "I'll be ready." They extinguished the lamp and lay in their separate beds, listening to the night sounds of the town. Sarah was acutely aware of Garrett's presence just a few feet away, the rhythm of his breathing, the rustle of sheets as he shifted position. "Sarah," his voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, I remembered something when I was outside looking at the stars." A pause. "My last name." "It's Lawson." "Garrett Lawson," Sarah said, testing the name. "Yes," the relief in his voice was palpable. "That's right. Does it help remembering your name?" "It feels like finding an anchor in a storm," he replied. "A small piece of solid ground to stand on." Sarah understood that feeling all too well. After Thomas died, she had clung to her own name like a lifeline. Sarah Reynolds, not Sarah Caldwell. A return to the woman she had been before marriage, before loss had reshaped her world. "What about you?" Garrett asked. "What anchors you?" The question caught her by surprise. "Movement, I suppose. As long as I'm moving forward, I don't have to look back." "And what are you not looking back at?" Sarah stared into the darkness, considering how much to reveal. "Disappointment, betrayal, the usual stories." "Your husband." "Among others," she sighed. "Thomas wasn't a bad man, just weak in ways I didn't discover until it was too late." "The mining accident." "Wasn't an accident," Sarah finished. "He owed money to dangerous people. When he couldn't pay, they made an example of him." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Finally, Garrett spoke again, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago," Sarah replied, though they both knew 3 years wasn't so very long at all. "Get some sleep, Garrett Lawson. We have an early start tomorrow." True to her word, Sarah woke while the stars still shone bright overhead. They dressed and packed in silence, moving with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to early departures. The hotel was quiet as they made their way downstairs, leaving payment on the unmanned front desk. The stables were shrouded in pre-dawn darkness. As they saddled their horses, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She glanced repeatedly at the door, her nerves strung tight as piano wire. "Almost ready," Garrett murmured, tightening the cinch on his gelding saddle. A floorboard creaked behind them. Sarah turned to see a silhouette blocking the stable entrance, the glint of a revolver visible even in the dim light. "Leaving so soon?" a gravelly voice asked. "And here I thought we had unfinished business, Lawson." Garrett stepped in front of Sarah, his hand hovering near his own weapon. "I don't know you," a harsh laugh answered him. "That's rich coming from the man who stole from me." "I didn't steal anything," Garrett replied evenly. "At least, not that I recall." The figure moved closer, and Sarah could make out a weather-beaten face beneath a flat-brimmed hat. "Playing games won't help you, Lawson. Hand over the map, and maybe I'll let you and your woman ride out of here." Sarah tensed at the word woman, her hand sliding toward the derringer in her pocket. Garrett remained perfectly still, his voice calm when he spoke. "You're the one who attacked me in Silverage, and should have finished the job," the man spat. "Now the map, last chance." Everything happened at once. Garrett lunged sideways as a shot rang out, the bullet splintering wood where he had stood. Sarah drew her derringer and fired, the small gun's report thunderous in the confined space. The man cursed as the bullet grazed his arm, his weapon dropping from suddenly nerveless fingers. Garrett was on him in an instant, driving a fist into the man's jaw with enough force to snap his head back. The stranger stumbled, then fell as Garrett struck him again. "Sarah, the horses." Garrett called, stooping to retrieve the fallen revolver. She didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing the reins of both animals, she led them toward the back door of the stable as shouts rang out from the direction of the hotel. Garrett joined her moments later, blood on his knuckles but determination in his eyes. "His friends will be coming," he said, swinging into the saddle. "We need to move." They galloped out of Red Rock as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern horizon, taking a game trail that led into the foothills rather than the main road. Behind them, they could hear the commotion of pursuit, but the sounds grew fainter as they pressed deeper into the wilderness. Only when they were certain they'd lost their pursuers did they slow to a walk, giving the horses a chance to recover. Garrett's face was grim as he scanned the terrain behind them. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I've dragged you into danger." "I made my own choice," Sarah replied. "Though I admit I'd like to know what's on that map that's worth killing for." Garrett withdrew the folded paper from his pocket, studying it with newfound intensity. "That man knew me, called me by name. Does that help your memory?" He shook his head. "Not enough." "But it confirms the map is important." He looked up at her. "You should go your own way, Sarah. Head to California as you planned. This isn't your fight. And leave you alone with 3 men hunting you. That seems unwise." A reluctant smile touched his lips. "Are you always this stubborn?" "Always," she confirmed. "Besides, I know the San Juans. You need a guide." The truth was, Sarah couldn't explain her own actions, even to herself. For 3 years, she had avoided entanglements, focusing solely on survival. Yet here she was, choosing to ride into danger with a man whose past was a mystery. Perhaps it was the nurse in her, unable to abandon someone in need. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something to do with the way Garrett looked at her, as if he saw past her carefully constructed defenses. They traveled west and south, following game trails and keeping to the cover of forests where possible. Garrett's skill as a horseman matched her own, and he moved through the wilderness with the confidence of someone who had spent considerable time outdoors. Occasionally, he would stop and study their surroundings with a furrowed brow, as if trying to match the landscape to some half-remembered image. By late afternoon, they had crossed into more rugged country, the foothills giving way to the first true mountains. They made camp in a sheltered ravine near a stream that provided fresh water for them and the horses. "How's your head?" Sarah asked as they sat by a small, carefully banked fire. Garrett touched the bandage. "Better. The ache is fading, and your memory," he sighed. "Fragments." "Nothing coherent." He met her gaze across the flames. "What about you? 3 years is a long time to wander alone." I wasn't ready to settle anywhere, Sarah admitted. After Thomas died, I took what money we had and just started riding, took odd jobs when I needed to. Nursed the sick in towns where doctors were scarce. Running from something, Sarah poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. Perhaps, or looking for something, I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. And your sister in California, will you find it there? Peace maybe, she said softly, a place to belong again. Garrett's eyes reflected the firelight as he studied her. You're a remarkable woman, Sarah Reynolds. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. I'm a survivor, like you. Is that what we are, survivors? Isn't that enough? He seemed to consider this. Maybe it has been, but I think, he hesitated. I think I was looking for something more before I lost my memory. The map, Sarah suggested. Not just that. Garrett's voice dropped lower. Something worth finding. The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Sarah looked away first, busying herself with unrolling her bedding. We should rest, she said. We've got a long ride tomorrow if we want to reach the area on that map. They took turns keeping watch through the night. During Sarah's shift, she found herself studying Garrett's sleeping form, the strong lines of his profile, the way one hand remained close to his weapon even in sleep. He was a man shaped by hardship, yet there was a fundamental decency to him that transcended whatever violence his life had contained. Morning brought clear skies and a decision to make. According to Sarah's reckoning, they were approaching the region depicted on Garrett's map. But the map itself was frustratingly vague, with few landmarks to guide them beyond the natural formations. If that's the Devil's Backbone, Sarah said, pointing to a jagged ridgeline visible to the southwest, then the X would be somewhere in this valley below it. Garrett nodded, his eyes scanning the terrain thoughtfully. There must be something there worth finding, worth killing for. Gold, most likely, Sarah replied. This region has produced some rich strikes over the years. Rich enough to hunt a man down, some men would kill for far less. They rode down into the valley, following a deer trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. The air grew cooler as shadows lengthened, and Sarah found herself glancing over her shoulder more frequently, unable to shake the feeling they were being watched. There, Garrett said suddenly, reining his horse to a stop. He pointed to a dark opening in the hillside ahead, partially obscured by brush and fallen timber. That looks like a mine entrance. Sarah studied the site with a practiced eye, abandoned by the look of it, but not ancient. They approached cautiously, tethering their horses to a sturdy pine before continuing on foot. Garrett drew his revolver, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger. Sarah followed close behind, her derringer ready. The mine entrance was indeed abandoned, but relatively recent. Wooden support beams still held firm, and the rails for ore carts remained largely intact, disappearing into the darkness. We'll need light, Sarah said, retrieving a small lantern from her saddlebag. Garrett touched her arm. Are you sure about this? Abandoned mines can be dangerous. So can men with guns, she countered, and I'd rather face the mine. The lantern cast eerie shadows as they ventured into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The air grew damp and cool, with the distinctive smell of earth and minerals. They had gone perhaps 100 yards when the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, clearly a site where miners had struck a vein. Look at this, Garrett said, holding the lantern higher. The walls gleamed with streaks of ore silver by the look of it. But what caught Sarah's attention was the wooden box tucked into a niche in the wall, partially hidden behind fallen rocks. Someone meant to conceal that, she observed. Garrett handed her the lantern and carefully moved the rocks aside, revealing a strong box of the sort banks used to transport valuables. It was locked, but the lock was no match for the butt of Garrett's revolver. The lid creaked open to reveal several leather pouches and a stack of papers. What is it? Sarah asked, leaning closer. Garrett opened one of the pouches, and even in the dim lantern light, the contents gleamed unmistakably gold coins, at least a dozen. The other pouches proved to contain similar treasures. This doesn't make sense, Garrett murmured, examining the papers. These are deeds, property transfers. He shuffled through them, his brow furrowing. Wait, I know these names. You remember some of it, he said slowly. I was investigating something. These deeds, they're fraudulent, part of a land scheme. What kind of scheme? Before Garrett could answer, a voice called from the tunnel entrance. That's far enough, Lawson. They turned to see the three men from Red Rock, each holding a revolver trained on them. The leader, the man Garrett had fought in the stable, stepped forward, a cruel smile on his weathered face. We followed your tracks, he said. Not very clever, coming straight to the evidence. Blackwood, Garrett said suddenly, the name seemingly appearing from nowhere in his memory. Samuel Blackwood, you're wanted in 4 states. The man's smile faltered slightly. So you remember now. Unfortunate. I remember enough, Garrett replied, his voice hardening. You've been forcing ranchers off their land with forged deeds, then selling the properties to the railroad at a profit. A profitable arrangement, Blackwood agreed, until a nosy U.S. Marshal started asking questions. He gestured with his gun. The money and the deeds, hand them over. Sarah's mind raced. U.S. Marshal. The pieces suddenly fell into place. Garrett's bearing, his skill with weapons, the way he assessed threats. He was a lawman, not a criminal. And then what? Garrett asked, making no move toward the box. You'll kill us anyway. Probably, Blackwood admitted, but I might be persuaded to make it quick. The tension in the chamber was palpable, the air heavy with the threat of violence. Sarah could feel her heart pounding against her ribs as she assessed their options, none of them good. The lady doesn't need to die, Garrett said, his voice calm despite the danger. Let her go and I'll give you what you want. Garrett, no, Sarah protested. Blackwood laughed. Touching, Marshal, but I'm afraid she's seen too much. Then we have a problem, Garrett replied, because I won't let you harm her. What happened next unfolded with breathtaking speed. Garrett kicked the lantern toward their adversaries, plunging the chamber into darkness as the flame extinguished. Gunshots erupted, muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the chaos. Sarah felt Garrett's hand close around her arm, pulling her behind a pile of fallen rock as bullets struck stone around them. When I move, run for the entrance, Garrett whispered in her ear. Don't stop, don't look back. I won't leave you, she hissed back. This isn't a debate, Sarah. His voice was firm. On 3, 1, 2, before he could say 3, more gunshots rang out but from the direction of the tunnel entrance. Confused shouts followed, then the thud of a body falling. A voice called out, United States Marshal, drop your weapons. A moment of stunned silence followed, then the sound of guns clattering to the stone floor. Someone struck a match, then lit a lantern, revealing the changed tableau. 2 new men stood in the chamber entrance, badges gleaming on their chests, their revolvers trained on Blackwood and his remaining companion. The third member of Blackwood's gang lay motionless on the ground. Lawson, one of the newcomers called, you in here. Here, Cooper, Garrett replied, helping Sarah to her feet as they emerged from behind the rocks. The marshal named Cooper grinned broadly. Damn, Garrett, we thought you were dead. Been tracking these vermin for days after they bragged about killing a marshal in Silverridge. Nearly succeeded, Garrett admitted, touching his bandaged head. Lost my memory for a while there. Cooper's eyes shifted to Sarah. And who's this? Sarah Reynolds, Garrett answered before she could speak. She saved my life, tended my wound when I couldn't remember my own name. Cooper tipped his hat to her. Madam, the U.S. Marshal Service is in your debt. As Blackwood and his surviving partner were restrained, Garrett gathered the strongbox and its contents evidence in what was clearly an ongoing investigation. Sarah watched him move with renewed confidence, his bearing that of a man who had found his place in the world again. You remember everything now? She asked quietly as they emerged from the mine into the fading afternoon light. Garrett nodded slowly. Most of it. I was sent to investigate reports of land fraud, followed Blackwood's trail to Silverage where they ambushed me. He looked at her, his expression softening. But I remember everything since I met you with perfect clarity. Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the intensity of his gaze. So, what happens now? Now, Cooper interjected, approaching with the prisoners in tow, we take these gentlemen to Denver to stand trial. The evidence you recovered should be enough to put them away for a long time. And you'll go with them, Sarah said to Garrett, unable to keep the note of resignation from her voice. Back to your duty, Garrett studied her face. My duty, he repeated slowly. Yes. That evening they made camp by a clear stream, the marshals keeping careful watch over their prisoners. Sarah sat apart from the others, watching the flames of the campfire dance against the gathering darkness. So much had changed in so few days. She had found a lost man in an abandoned saloon, helped him recover his identity, and now he would return to his life and she to hers. May I join you? She looked up to find Garrett standing nearby, his expression uncertain. Sarah nodded, and he settled beside her on the fallen log she'd claimed as a seat. Cooper tells me they'll reach Denver in 3 days, he said after a moment. The trial will probably take weeks. And then you'll be assigned somewhere else, Sarah finished for him. Chasing the next Blackwood. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. That was my life before, he said finally. I'm not sure it's the life I want now. Sarah turned to look at him, surprised. What do you mean? When I couldn't remember who I was, he said slowly, all I had was the present moment, who I was with, what I was feeling. His eyes met hers. It was clarifying. And what did you feel? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That for the first time in years I wasn't alone. Garrett's hand found hers in the gathering darkness. Sarah, I don't know what your plans or if California is still calling to you, but I'd like the chance to see where this road leads, together. Sarah looked down at their joined hands. For 3 years she had wandered alone, carrying the weight of her past like a stone around her neck. But in the past few days, something had shifted within her, a thawing, a willingness to trust again. What about your badge? She asked. I've served for 8 years, Garrett replied. Given enough, Cooper would understand if I turned it in. The possibility hovered between them, a future neither had anticipated when their paths crossed in that abandoned saloon. Sarah thought of her sister's letters, of the promise of California. But she also thought of the way Garrett looked at her, as if she were something precious and rare. I don't want you to give up who you are, she said finally. Garrett smiled, the expression transforming his face. I'm not. I'm choosing who I want to become. He squeezed her hand gently. Besides, California has law enforcement too, if I decided to wear a badge again someday. Sarah couldn't help but laugh at his persistence. Are you proposing to follow me to California, Marshal Lawson? I'm proposing to follow you anywhere, Sarah Reynolds. His voice grew serious. If you'll have me. The answer came more easily than she would have expected, rising from a place in her heart she'd thought long closed. I'll have you. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, the world seemed somehow changed, brighter, full of possibility rather than shadow. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood on the platform of the Denver train station, watching as Garrett shook hands with Cooper and the other marshals who had come to see him off. The trial of Samuel Blackwood had concluded with a guilty verdict. Justice served for the ranchers who had been driven from their homes. Garrett approached her, his badge no longer pinned to his vest. In its place was a simple gold wedding band on his left hand, matching the one she wore. Ready? He asked, taking her hand. Sarah nodded, glancing at the westbound train that would carry them toward California. Ready. As they boarded, Sarah thought of the night she had found a wounded stranger in an abandoned saloon. I don't know who I am now, he had said in his despair. Start with alive, she had told him. Now, as Garrett settled beside her, his shoulder warm against hers, she knew they had both found something more than mere survival. They had found a beginning. The train whistle blew, and they pulled away from Denver, heading west toward a future neither could have imagined just weeks before. Sarah rested her head on Garrett's shoulder, content in the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the porch of their ranch house near Sacramento, watching as Garrett taught their 4-year-old son to ride his pony in the paddock. Her sister Rebecca waved from the garden where she was picking vegetables for dinner, her own children playing nearby. Life had taken unexpected turns since that fateful night in Silverridge. Garrett had indeed found work with the local sheriff's office, but only part-time. The ranch, a modest spread with good water and fertile soil, occupied most of their energy. They had built something solid together, something that honored both their pasts while creating a future neither had dared to hope for. "Mama, look," their son called, guiding his pony in a circle without Garrett's assistance. "I'm doing it, I see, Gabriel." Sarah called back, pride swelling in her chest. They had named him after Garrett's father, a man Garrett spoke of with quiet respect when sharing stories of his childhood in Missouri. As twilight painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah thought again of the question Garrett had asked her years ago beside a campfire in the Colorado wilderness. Is that what we are, survivors? She knew the answer now, watching her family gather for the evening meal, hearing laughter echo across the land they had made their own. They were more than survivors. They were alive fully, gloriously alive, and that had been enough to start with.